Thank you for the wonderful work on the film. I taught Eliza and her sister Sonora. I taught Forrest and I taught Chandra, who was a witness at the trial. What was your biggest surprise during the project?
The biggest surprise during the project? I mean, honestly, there were so many. I mean, the biggest surprise is that Dan figured it out. And he figured it out while the families were still, except for Maurice. Families is the wrong word for Maurice, but the cloud of people deeply impacted this were still alive. And also it was really interesting to talk to Forrest. I thought his interview was incredible. So I wouldn't say it was a surprise.
For the last episode.
For the last episode, yes.
Right.
And I don't know, just getting to see how different people process grief differently. Everyone processes grief differently, and that was really interesting.
The reluctance on the part of the three who lived to participate in this is interesting to me. I mean, not surprising.
Well, I didn't have hardly any time to make it, and I think we had to make it really quickly. And HBO at first thought it was just a coda, and then I was like, y'all, I don't think it's a coda. This is like long. And then the more, but I had a deadline that was really, because they thought it was going to be quite short. Yeah. And so, and we were locked into that. So, so I think that if I'd had more time, I think it might have been different.
Forrest is still living here.
Yeah, he has a bar.
Has a bar.
Go to his bar. Yeah.
Right, yeah. Have you talked to him since?
Yes.
How's he doing?
I think it hasn't really hit him yet. I just think he's still worried about who's going to cover his shifts when he gets sick or something. I mean, that's what we talked about.
He's just thinking about normal stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
So everyone seems to feel that Robert Bashir's acted alone, but at the time of the murders, several witnesses said they saw two men sitting in the back of the yogurt shop, nursing their drinks, whispering to each other. Is there any possibility that this time out he might have had an accomplice, and are they still holding on to the evidence in the possibility that they might identify other DNA at some future point? I
mean, you should actually talk to Dan later, but I would say that I'm pretty sure he did it by himself. I think that if you've seen the 5th episode, he had done this to 4 other people, the same thing, except he let them live. And I think for me, in my mind, the fact that he had a ruse where he could do that, and we know that he did that, is pretty convincing to me. He always worked alone, right, that we know of. But I think this is something that's actively being investigated right now, but I don't think anyone really believes that. And also that account was under hypnosis, and it changed a few times, so I think these things are cloudy.
The account referred to here.
That she's referring to, yes.
Yeah. And the person who ultimately, it was decided, committed this crime, he died in 1999.
Yes.
Right, so there's no way to actually know from him directly. Sir.
Great show, Evan. Margaret, looking back on this, what advice or what lessons do you think the Austin media should take from what you learned looking back on what happened?
The Austin media, can you say why the Austin
The news media.
But what about
the way the story was covered over the years? Are there takeaways that you have that you would suggest to the media? And then the second part of that is the same thing, with all respect to Dan and the people at APD. Are there any lessons or observations you have about this over the 30 plus years that would be important for APD?
For law enforcement.
Oh, sure. I would answer the second one first, because I feel like the media question is media, this was such a covered story. I don't think that I could speak of the media as a blanket, because it was covered many different ways, many different places. But I will say that the APD, I don't think you should convict someone based on a confession when we know that cops can lie to you, and also, you see coerced confessions in the footage. So, but I think that's changed now at APD. So that's what is said in the film at the press conference.
I mentioned to you before we came out today that I thought one of the interesting things about the film is you're not judgy about anybody or anything, but you particularly are not judgy about law enforcement or the failings of law enforcement over these 35 years?
I mean, I think I'm judgy about tunnel vision, but I also think that when you interview someone, you have to listen to them as a full human. And when I interview people, I don't go in with judgy is not something I come in with. Like, it's just not who I am.
Right. I mean, people watching the film may judge
Yeah,
the
let
police,
the audience judge, but that's not my job.
but not your job as a filmmaker. Commissioner.
Thank you for doing this, and especially episode 5. Full disclosure, I was in the news media during Yogurt, and it had an impact on all of us as
bet.
well. And thank you for giving us closure in terms of that story being told. My question is, in the editing process, how did you decide, especially in episode 5, when it's like, okay, this is coming to a wrap, what made it into episode 5, and what might still be out there in terms of there any interesting stories or any interesting interviews that didn't make the cut?
I mean,
that
there's
you think-
always so many of those.
Could you share some of that,
Sure.
please?
Well, you know, it's funny, like with episode 5, that what was so crazy about episode 5 was that sort of the way that we engineered it going in, or what I thought. So usually when you're editing a show like this, and this is the first series I've ever made, but what I learned from these 3.5, 4 years was that, you know, you usually, you start with something, it goes somewhere else. With the 5th episode, it did not. But we didn't have any time to go anywhere else either. If it hadn't have gone exactly like the way we envisioned it, we wouldn't have finished on time. We wouldn't have delivered to HBO when we had to. So it was that tight. But in my mind, it was about 3 things. It was about how Dan solved the crime and the kind of intricacies of that, which is sort of like the first 30 minutes of the episode. The second part is about how the families responded to having something go, and not just the families, like Claire Huey, who's the filmmaker, who's in all first 4 episodes, how people, the other previous investigators, how you go from not knowing to knowing what that does to your brain. That was so interesting. Because I remember when I interviewed, all of the family members didn't really have room in their brains. What Sean Ayers says is, I haven't gotten to that yet. And that always really stuck with me, that he didn't feel like he had, there was so much trauma for him that there wasn't room yet for the boys. And I thought, like, people have been kind of judgy about that who watch it, but
Why don't the families have more empathy for the?
I
for
think
the
because he doesn't have
boys?
space for it yet.
Right.
Like, I think that, and I think the judginess is misplaced because we haven't gone through that, and I think that, I think they will get to it, and I think he's very smart to say yet when he says that. And then the third part of the episode is about what happens to the boys who were wrong. I shouldn't call them boys, they're men, who were wrongfully accused. And because that was, when I heard that Robert Bashir's was found, that was the first thought I had, was about, well, what about them? I mean, they've had this cloud over them forever. Like, I really want to talk to them. But usually with something like that, with the trauma they've endured, they're not going to want to talk to me right away. Like, in the first 4 episodes, I didn't say, oh, you definitely didn't do it, because I didn't know. So they're not going to want, they're going to think, they're not going to want to talk to me necessarily. Even though I thought they probably didn't do it, I didn't say definitively in my first 4 episodes that they didn't. So I think that there was a barrier to entry there that, I couldn't just get in.
There was the relationship between Pierce and Welburn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then in the 5th episode, Pierce's widow
Right.
and Welburn, kind of once all of this had been resolved. I thought it was very emotional.
I remember Justin, the sound man, when he got that moment on his boom, and I remember because we were at that conference, and that was the last day we shot, and he was like, "We got it," and because he could hear it, and I was like, "What did they say?" I couldn't hear it, and he told me, and I was like, "Oh my God."
Yeah, because it was Pierce, after all those years before, who had ultimately set all this in motion.
Yes.
And the question was, years later, did Welburn or any of these folks essentially forgive Pierce? I mean, it's hard. It's hard to watch.
That moment was crazy.
It was
and-
extraordinarily hard to watch. Yeah. Speaking of raps, that's a wrap. Please give Margaret Brown a big hand. Thank her for being here. We'll see you all again soon. Okay. Good.